Amazing. Thank you very much. For a second, I thought it was one of those events where everybody's going to be disappointed. So I'm very happy that we're starting with the right first step, which is technology, right? Okay, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. Actually, it's just one question. And if you have the opportunity, I would like to hear about what you're thinking in the chat. And the question is, why do we measure anything? Any idea? Why do we measure anything? Why do we say, oh, data? Okay, thank you, Adam. Data is a really good answer. Anybody has any other suggestions about, okay, to make decisions? Yes, thank you, Shirley. Shelly, anybody has, I just want one more answer. Okay, yes, okay, you can improve what you can measure and then to understand the results of our actions. Love it. Love it. Okay. Well, there is a very important part of making a decision, and that's obviously understanding that sometimes decisions are based on data, sometimes decisions are based on metrics, sometimes decisions are understood but not applied. And sometimes, whenever we try to really understand our actions, we use our perception, but we don't really have any specific ways to get information in place. Therefore, we don't have any way to make it perfect or to compare. Thank you very much, everybody, that offers some of the options here. And the first thing that we have to understand is that decisions, what they really do is they give us a sort of certainty. And in this case, we're going to talk about certainty in two aspects. We're talking about usability and inclusion. And if you have noticed, my title is how to avoid the biggest or the most common mistakes when you're trying to measure usability in inclusion. And for that, I'm not going to assume that everybody knows the standard definition of usability, but according to the ISO 9441, usability relies on three key aspects: effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction. And this by itself would be perfect, but then we add two more specific questions with two more specific details. We talk about specified users and specified goals. And sometimes when we talk about this, this is when we're starting to introduce some biases, when we're starting to disassociate or alienate some people. And the fact is that sometimes when we are building a product, we need to make those decisions. But when we don't really understand that by being very specific in some users and being very specific about some goals, we are potentially impacting users that are already in our product, already in our service, and sometimes they are disappointed by what we're doing. Okay, so I would like to propose a bit of a different dynamic, and this is called inclusive usability testing. And this is exactly the same thing. We're still focusing on the efficiency and satisfactory aspects of your solutions. But when we are thinking about trying to reach every single user, trying to be for everybody in your platform, regardless of if they have a unique feature or circumstance, So we're trying to be part of this aspect of universal design. Now, the world of UX, the world of design is a bit complicated, So I really wish I could show you a bit of an easier map and territory, but interaction design is mostly the field that encompasses usability. And pretty much when we're talking about usability is that if you are using a product, if you are using a service, you are applying certain aspects of usability. Usability is not only part of human-computer interaction too. You can see that also overlaps with industrial design, with architecture, with visual design, information architecture, and any other layer of technology that at some point we're going to be adding, right? So be ready for AI, VR, and anything that you can imagine. At the end of the day, usability is still an interaction and is very important for us. All right. Also, just for the sake of this conversation, we are going to start thinking about how inclusion and usability is understood, at least by me, and how I wanted to express it to you. So usability for me is a gateway to apply inclusion. Yeah, as you can see, we're talking about inclusive usability, and pretty much of what have been a gateway for me to discover that is inclusive usability testing. So I can see that we are going to find two pieces of information that really forms a larger part of reality. One is data, and the other one is error. And this comes with the territory. So, for example, if I have this amazing, very cheap $10 measuring tape, well, I know that I have an instrument that potentially can introduce error in my measurements. I know that I can account for this error, and most likely it's going to be maybe 1 or 2 well, not centimeters, millimeters. But it's good for me because I can calibrate my decisions based on the margin of error that I know. If I put together the data and the error, most likely I'm going to start having a close approximation of reality. Now, also for this conversation, I'm going to make a bit of a distinction between errors and mistakes. So errors most likely are going to come from our tools, like this measuring tape, and mistakes imply some intentionality, some interaction and decisions made by stakeholders and people, right? So let's say mistakes are only on the people level. We can talk about errors in usability, errors in metrics, but maybe this is a bit of a longer conversation that cannot fit in 20 minutes. All right, so the first mistake, and this is what I call mistake zero, is not measuring anything at all. And I've been there. I've been in many places where, yeah, our products and services have a relative success, but we don't know if this success comes from being smart or just being lucky. And what I really want you to start thinking is that whenever we are measuring something, we have a way to express what our values are. So according to Margaret Hefferman, we measure what we treasure. And this makes a lot of sense, right? Because once we start evaluating progress, ensuring accountability, allocating resources, looking how we are improving our efficiencies, foster continuous improvement, and maybe creating a good understanding of what works and what doesn't, we can start fostering innovation. We can start making progress towards our goals. Okay, this is mistake number one. And this is coming from once we start thinking about implementing metrics. This is our strategy towards this topic. And the thing is that sometimes we think that inclusion is one of those things that are not tangible, right? Where is inclusion? Which part of the body do you feel it, right? And the thing is that sometimes we misunderstand the sentimental part of inclusion that can felt as belonging, but inclusion actually looks like a task, looks like a process, looks like a set of rules that we implement. So based on this, we're going to use a very, very nice, I think I double click. All right, I'm going to go back. A very nice definition by Berne Myers that says diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. How lovely is that? How lovely does it feel like actually you are part of a big party, and you have quite a lot of autonomy on how to make it happen. And if you think about inclusion is an invitation to people for dancing. Well, imagine that actually we have a really good way to measure those interactions, right? We can establish some metrics at the start, tracking how many people have been invited to dance, which kind of music were more prone for people to jump on the dance floor and ask people to come over, how much interaction some people had, and also kind of like the classic shy people, wallflowers that maybe at some point they wanted to dance, but they were never invited, right? So once you start looking at inclusion at the ground level, in this particular case, usability, most likely you are going to have a very effective way to track what matters and what actually is working or not. All right. Mistake number two. This is implementation of metrics, and this is This happens when inclusion is not shared as a common goal. Same thing with the value of everything. Sometimes I face that with the value of design. I have been in places where I cannot set up a metric because I do not own the outcome. So what does it mean? So for example, I want to implement a form similar to an NPS score, a Net Promoter Score, and that belongs to marketing. So marketing doesn't allow for me to track that. And this is the kind of circumstances and politics that sometimes permeate as part of maybe a siloed organization. But I really want you to understand that obviously you have to be inclusive about inclusion. So the thing is that you cannot be the only passionate person in the room. It has to be shared, has to be a common value that needs to be understood. Same thing for as a designer. I can design potentially something very useful, very effective, very satisfactory. But if I don't share my expectations and parameters to my counterparts on the development side and product, most likely some of that is going to get lost, right? Some of that is going to start bringing misalignments. So the thing is that sometimes when we are implying inclusion, um, we really need to feel that we need to make a business case for that. We need to have return on investment, return on inclusion. But as a matter of fact, there is a more important conversation that needs to happen, and is how do we attach inclusion to the company vision? At the end of the day, it's all about values, right? We measure what we treasure. So if we have a business strategy that comes from how we think we are doing business, who we think we are, why do we exist, most likely that element of inclusion will start permeating in multiple departments, and we're going to have clear OKRs, clear objectives, and key results. So, as you can understand, sometimes I have issues when it comes about usability because I cannot get my friends from legal and compliance to agree about some aspects that maybe the law is not really explicit about. So they always are trying to make it a bit more complicated, or they are trying to make it a bit more cumbersome for the user. If we have that shared understanding that inclusion is an important part, most likely we are going to have common places where we can start having better conversations. All right, so we go for the next potential mistake. And this is a big one, and this can have real life repercussions. And this is not considering intersectionality. So before going to the topic of intersectionality, I want to show you something that is very sad and worrisome for me. So this is a map that is showing sexual orientation laws in around the world. So obviously, if we are located in Canada, we have a good amount of rights that allow people to have that level of recognition. Certainly, there are places where if you have a gender that they do not consider, and this is the important part, they do not consider traditional, uh, well, the repercussions can be either a prison for life or it can go to the death penalty, right? So the ranges that we have right now in the world are huge. And yeah, I hope that over time, some of that is going to be progressing, but we still live in a place and a world in a technology a spectrum that is not even for everybody, right? So the thing is that whenever we are designing, for example, surveys, and we want to recruit users and we want to have a good uh, customer base so we can start asking for feedback, we need to rely on what we're asking for or what are we asking for, right? So if we have self-reported data, yeah, it's possible that the users will not like to provide the real circumstances because they cannot speak freely, or potentially because we haven't built that report, we haven't built trust, and we haven't really explicitly say how we are going to be using that information, and that information is not going to go anywhere else, right? So recently, I read the news about Yeah, some governments using Grinder to start flagging potential users, and therefore, yeah, start attacking them. And yeah, this is a very complicated topic, because if we have a product that is focusing on a community, we have to also the responsibility to protect that community, right? Another aspect of intersectionality is knowing that you can be one thing, but most likely you have multiple things, and all those multiple aspects that make you you are a combination of different dynamics, different let's say flows that make you you. And if at the end of the day we try to recruit users basically in one single aspect, potentially we are going to be missing the big spectrum of things, right? Potentially we are going to be assuming that just because one user and another user share one common trait, they are equally they're living equal situations, right? So, for example, we talk about location in the previous example. So, my recommendation is to if we need to recruit users, let's start thinking about intersectionality in the terms of an intersectionality wheel. So, yeah, as a team, what you can do is you can trace four circles, and in your fourth circle, you can start writing down potential structures that reinforce exclusion in your users. Another part is, on the third level, thinking about the types of discrimination that impact identity. And this is something that really, for example, when we have about a form that directly asks people for pronouns, and maybe the pronouns that they're looking for are not there, but also makes it required for people to express their pronouns. We are setting up some of those dynamics that potentially can bring discrimination. Another part is aspects of identity. As I said, we can be understood from one perspective, but we have multiple aspects that are continuously evolving. And the innermost is unique circumstances. And these unique circumstances most likely are what makes us us. And quite a lot of the time can be defined in two aspects, aspects of our relationship to power and our relationship to aspects that make us vulnerable. I'm just going to leave it there. I would suggest people if you want to kind of like do some more research, you can have some references, or I can share some more information there. Another thing that happens as our mistake number 4 is that we use the same test for every user. And I can understand that, right? Because if we have let's say, scientific approach, we want to have standardized users, so we don't have kind of like errors of replication, right? Like you don't want to kind of like have one test that is not comparable to other tests. But what can happen is, and I love this joke. I love this joke because it kind of describes my life. Uh, what happens if the test is not conducive to allow the user to explore the test in the full range? In this case, for example, we're talking about language. Most likely the test is not testing the product or the service. The test is testing the user. So I've been in scenarios where we are trying to test something. For example, we have a test called the 5-second testing. And this is one way for us to gauge if the first impression of a design are what we are intending to do. But as you can imagine, it's not really applicable for everybody, right? So, for example, I took this screenshot of a website in Japanese, and Japanese design is very different from what we are used to. And certainly, you need to know how to read Japanese to have a full impression of this. But if we need to go through the process of translation, or if we need to go through the process of cultural habituation of how we decipher visual cues, most likely, yeah, that test is not really what we're looking for, right? So my recommendation, obviously, is think about aspects that could potentially alienate your users, and try to adapt the measurement process, So think about maybe some wording on the test, or maybe how the survey has been delivered. Not everybody are really keen to get their surveys done on mobile, and some people might not have the capability to complete that, and so on, right? So it's at the end of the day, it's just being very sure that we're measuring the service, that we are not measuring the user, and whenever we are implying that there is a layer of information or service that maybe needs to be available to the user, we have the capability to actually go to the user and not really forcing the user to come to us. Okay, fifth and last, and this is more about how we talk about the reporting side of things, you know. And sometimes I find that if we show results without context, we kind of like forget about that information by itself do not really motivate people. And if we saw just a range of data without context, most likely people are going to start bringing or thinking about the wrong conclusions. So, for example, I show you oranges and apples, you know, and I show you a percentage. And without really context of what I'm trying to say or context of where I got that information, potentially I'm going to start thinking about the wrong metrics. And certainly, at this point, I assume that everybody has the right intentions. But if we start choosing metrics that do not align with the research questions or goals, or we don't bring that context that connects the two dots, most likely we're going to have, once again, misalignment. And everything that we have built for, or every work that we have done, is going to go to waste. Another thing that can happen is that, and I've been on that side, I want to make really nice, slick presentations, you know? So I just want to kind of like show really cool graphs, and maybe I want to build a dashboard, maybe I want to just create a report, and I think that extra information gets in the way. Well, what we're doing is we're just chopping a good part of what makes that orange and orange and what makes that apple and apple, right? So if at the end of the day we have a stakeholder that do not really differentiate the value of having two different fruits, potentially we are going to be in trouble. At the end of the day, when we have a reporting exercise, we are also exercising our storytelling skills. So we need to think about two different ledgers where we need to, let's say, place that storytelling. One is you are telling this story, you are doing this report because you want converging strategies. You want people to come together and once again think about the values and how we're living our values through either a business process or a strategy and so on. Another part is that when you have a service or a product, you need to acknowledge that you're going to be living in a place where your project or your product or everything that you'll be building is experiencing multiple ways. So you have an ever evolving layer of experiences. And this is really fantastic, at least for me, right? Because if I make a website that is accessible for a wide range of people, everybody will be able to come from different places and have still that satisfactory, efficient, and efficient and efficacy way to do things, you know. And at the end of the day, this is what we want, right? We don't want everybody to live the same experience. We want people to go through their own experiences because they are living their own life according to their own methods. All right, I'm going to bring everything together and I'm just going to give a couple of ideas, right? So if there is anything that you need to take from this talk is that, hey, maybe you need to share common objectives, but especially when you're talking about inclusion and usability. Another part is consider intersectionality. You know, people can be multiple things. I can be a Mexican and a Canadian at the same time. Another part is try to test those scenarios and try to see if your test is testing what it should be. If not, try to adequate that to really it gets closer to the users. Another part is generate trust. You know, trust is everything. So most of the time, we only reach our users when we want their information, and this is not exactly the best way to build a relationship, right? Set up accessible test processes and environments. This is obviously very important. And keep data and observations together. Last couple of thoughts. Sometimes I feel like we talk about inclusion as, okay, this new thing that we just discovered a couple of years ago. And there are reasons for that, and I can maybe express some of that later on. But I just want you to know that inclusion is being part of who we are, and it's really one of the pre-requirements to really evolve and transcend as individuals and also as human beings, you know. So obviously, I'm very sure that you are familiar with the Maslow's hierarchies of needs, and yeah, belonging and love is right in the middle, right? Okay, you cannot go anywhere else without really knowing that you are part of a larger community, that you have been accepted, and also that the service and products that you are using are conducive for you to be part of a all. All right, let's get to the last thought, if I can. All right, okay. So there is this image that I really like. Oh my gosh, there is some delay. Okay, there is this image that I really like, and it's Confucius in a wheelchair. And we have, oh my God. Okay, no, yes. Sorry, guys, there is some delay that is messing everything with what I'm doing. Okay, so I really like this image because it not only implies that accessibility methods have been around since early stages. This is an image from the 1600s, but the wheelchair has been around since almost, I don't know, 2,500 years ago. The thing is that if we think about the records and the metrics that we keep really good track of, is most likely it's going to be histories or uh, elements that describe our historical bias towards aggression, towards war, towards disagreement, towards racism and genocide. And if you read the history book and you start thinking about what is coming up next, most likely you are always going to feel that the next thing is going to be always something negative. You know, we're going to end up potentially killing each other. But the thing is that we are here. We're still here. We have developed quite a lot of technology, culture, processes, and gone so far that actually the fact is that we haven't been really good at keeping track of what elements are we evolving and are causing us to be more inclusive. But the fact is that for me to be here having this conversation with you, that amplifies my capabilities to being able to talk to a larger audience and have these kind of conversations. And this is something that I am very grateful. So I really invite you to everybody to start thinking about what kind of measurements you can apply from your own perspective to think about inclusion and potentially being able to a larger wave of innovation where we all finally get a place of belonging. And my invitation also is, hey, let's keep on having a conversation. I am not pretending to be an expert. I'm just really good at talking to people. So I'm looking forward to hear from you. And if you have any particular feedback or anything that resonates with you, please put it on the QA. And if time permits, maybe we can also have another conversation outside of this wonderful space. So thank you, Adam. And maybe we can move on to